everybody. Happy Saturday. Happy New Year. I haven't seen you in any chats or anything before today. We have well, she's still out there. Myrna the squirrel showed up. She's like, I've been so into this case. I gotta know what's going on around here. Or it could just be the sunflower seeds and peanuts out there. I don't know. One of the two. How's everybody's week or weekend? I guess we're in the early portions of Saturday. Sherry, Cranky. I'm so excited to see Cranky Squirrel. Audrey, hello. Hope Brandy, you're driving safe. Mr. Kim's going to be moderating. Everyone send prayers out to Rose. She's handling some family stuff today. Yeah, Audrey, scaring off Gus. That's probably the case. So I started recording this morning, and this order is even longer when you're reading it. When you're reading it and having to cut to the footnotes, and then really early on, I'm like, yeah, I'm not reading all the citations. So you end up rereading the same shit over and over. So we're going to put it into two separate recordings. The first one will be going up here shortly. It's going to cover kind of what we're talking about today, but if you want the full scope, it's a great way to be able to just like throw it on, listen to it, and not have to read through 55 pages of court records. But it's still, if you get past the first, I'd say 10 minutes, that's all the like dry ass, like court stuff. Then it gets into the juice because it talks specifically about the legal issues that are coming up, and dives right into witness testimony. And the witness testimony is kind of where it's at. A lot of Rochelle Neese's statements, inconsistencies, all of that are part of that first recording. And then part two will come out this week. And that's going to cover the legal grounds and legal issues that were being weighed. And then Judge Massullo's ruling. So we're talking about the Scott Peterson appeal. In the description of this video, I have put the links to the family's website, the official Scott Peterson appeal website. I'll throw that here too. And a lot of this is there. What is not there, though, is the ruling. They still haven't uploaded that. I've kind of been waiting for that, hoping I could just direct you right to the document as well for people that want to read it themselves. But getting into the meat of it, today we're going to talk a little bit about what Rochelle Neese had to say about things she claimed that weren't on her mind. So we're going to start with some of the background here. So Rochelle Neese started off on the Scott Peterson case as an alternate juror. She was the first alternate that was actually seated. She became juror number 7, and ultimately served through the guilt phase and the penalty phase. She went on to write a book with several other of the jurors. And she became the strongest portion of the appeal to date, specifically in his habeas, because we're all entitled to a panel of unbiased jurors. And the allegation was that she was biased, and the evidence of that were some things in her background that she lied about on her jury voir dire questionnaire and omitted in the subsequent verbal voir dire being questioned. There were some questions about her finances and the fact that she was put, at a deficit, like heavy deficit as a single parent, especially by serving on the jury. It really did not enrich her. It put her at a disadvantage, but she chose to do it anyway. She wanted to do it. And then some statements that were made to jurors, some statements that were made that came out in the juror's book which is called We the Jury. And some other little things. But we're going to talk specifically about the incidences that she omitted that themselves lend themselves to being pretty relevant, okay? And even the court, spoiler alert, and if you've heard this already on our previous live on the other channel, you know that in the end, the court agreed that she lied, and that they considered it to be deliberate. They just sort of blew it off, you know what I mean? So the trial itself started on June 1st of 2004. So just keep 2004 in your mind. The crime, all of that was in 2002. But jury selection, all of that happened in the year 2004. It was a long trial. It was 5 months. They were not sequestered. Okay, so they're allowed to come and go. They had admonitions from the judge, but either way, they weren't in any way sequestered. The issues that happened with her, I'll tell you about the dates, because we're talking, not a lot of people know that there was a restraining order, but there was also a DV incident. And there were 2 restraining order violations. So we're talking a total of 4 things that were on the record. Okay. So these are things that the appellate team researched and pulled up themselves. Now, the other thing that came about is that she also admitted to a lawsuit, despite having said, I've never been part of a lawsuit. And her original 2020, October, she issued a statement in response to the habeas case, putting her at center stage, where she essentially gave the excuse that I said that I'd never been the victim of a crime. I've never witnessed a crime. All these answers that were no, she said, it's because I understood a lawsuit to be something where somebody is suing another for money or property. While on the stand in 2020, however, she lets loose and owns up to that she actually took the person who was restrained in this restraining order that was violated twice, apparently, took her to court in a lawsuit for money for lost wages because of her harassment, stalking, et cetera, which kind of blew that out of the water too. So it was no surprise that the court had to concede. There was nothing they could do. They had to concede. Yes, she's a liar. Okay. It just, in the end, spoiler alert, in the end, they kind of threw that out and said, but she wasn't biased. Okay. And I had to put it in 2 parts because it's so long. Okay. Number 1, but number 2, I was catching myself making all kinds of little sighs and like side commentary by the end of this morning's reading, where I'm like, yeah, my frustration at this court is starting to show. So I better take a breather. We'll just make it 2 parts because I think it's over an hour, the first reading anyway. And it's all the juicy stuff. You know what I mean? It's the gossip. So I guess that's what we're doing today. We're talking about the gossip around Rochelle Neese. So they didn't name her by name, which I think is freaking weird. Okay. So Strawberry Shortcake, Rochelle Neese, everybody knows who she is. She's written books. I don't think there's been an opportunity for her to get in front of a camera or get paid for an interview that she has not taken. Okay. So she's pretty well known. I mean, even just by Juror 7 at this point, people know you're talking about Rochelle Neese, you're talking about Strawberry Shortcake. The court kept her name out of it, but decided to give us the names of these people that perforated around her life. So Eddie Whiteside is baby daddy. Okay. So he's baby daddy to child number 3 and child number 4. She was pregnant with her 3rd child. Okay. When the original restraining order was issued against Eddie, I'll call him Eddie. Okay. Eddie Whiteside apparently had a side girlfriend. He had a couple of girlfriends. But he actually, and then we find out her first. I feel bad. Totally closed. And apparently, too, there's a footnote that I just was reading that they actually had to pull back. They put this like side, the second girlfriend's. Not only her full name is just freely used, but they also accidentally published her social security number, which I thought was bizarre. So it's like they protected Rochelle Neese a lot in this ruling and through these court proceedings, and not so much these kind of peripheral characters in the story. But her name is Marcella Kinsley. Okay. So I'll call her Marcella. So the original restraining order was against Marcella Kinsley. Okay. Rochelle was pregnant with Eddie's baby. She had 2 children prior. Okay. So this is their third. And there was some happenings. Okay. So there's some love triangle stuff going on. And Marcella is showing up at Rochelle's door, in her door, by the way, had maced Eddie in the face earlier that day, had been calling and hanging up at Rochelle Neese's home. And she stated that she had already changed her phone number because of these sort of harassing calls, but that Marcella had gotten her new number while home of Eddie's mom. Okay. So it's not the first time either that Eddie's mother becomes like a factor in this. Okay. But this is the original grounds that she filed for the restraining order, claiming that she was in fear for her safety and the safety of her unborn child. Now, she answered, however, no, when she was asked straight up in voir dire, have you been the victim of a crime? And in that also is, have you witnessed a crime, which goes even farther, right? Like whether, and it says, it's very specific, friends, family, anyone close to you, have you witnessed a crime? Okay. Follow-up questions in April of 2004 were asked. That's when they were doing the jury selection. All of this had happened starting in 2000. Okay. Now, she was given that restraining order. It was entered. And it covered her. It covered her child. Now, her child ends up being born, obviously. And there ends up being 2 call-ins for violations of that restraining order. One of them is super mysterious, okay? She won't address it. She says she doesn't even remember there being any, or she didn't consider one because there was good records on. That occurred when she was in the hospital giving birth to her 4th child, who also was Eddie's child. And we are in mid 2002. Okay. So now we're less than 2 years out from when she's asked these questions that just she never thought of. Okay. She just forgot these things ever happened to her. She's in the hospital giving birth to baby number 4 with her boyfriend, who she claims she lives with, that she claims she lived with during the trial. And she sees a video of Marcella at Eddie's mother's house holding the child that is still covered under the protection order. Now, keep in mind, they did uncover through had been a prior incident the year before, but their electronic record system that's in place now, it's called RIMS. It had not been in place back then. So things like face sheets have since been put into the system, but not all of the police records made it into the system because we're talking decades ago. So some of them had been purged by the time this RIM system came into place. So it's just policy changes over the years, right? So this other one, there isn't really a good record of, other than we know that it happened, and she is listed as the victim, and Marcella is listed for violating the restraining order. But the second one, we know it is about that she's holding the baby, that Rochelle Neese has put a restraining order on her, prohibiting her from coming near, and that Rochelle Neese, at that point, picked up a phone and called the Palo Alto Police Department to enforce this protection order. Okay. She really has to stretch at this point, right, to claim that she considers none of this a crime. But that's exactly what she did. She got up on, of course, had asked her, why would you pick up the phone and call the police? And she said, well, I was being spiteful. Okay. I was being springerish, it's worth a listen because it's a little bizarre, I guess. But then we move into a okay, so that alone I think is pretty good evidence. I think people, if it was us, if it was a loved one, a lot of us that are into true crime in general and kind of care about the legal system, I think a lot of us already would feel a little something, we'd feel some type of way about somebody with that kind of situation, because especially because it parallels so much to the situation she was preparing to sit in judgment as a juror for. I mean, lying during voir dire, it just essentially misrepresents a person. You know what I mean? And of course, the ultimate legal question that it boiled down to in the end is whether it made her biased. And we'll talk more about that next week, okay? Because it kind of becomes a question too in the legal realm of, when we're talking of actual bias, does that mean that the person has to be aware of it? Do they have to own up to it in order for it to be actual? Or is it possible that there is a litany of things that creates a bias that in voir dire, no matter which side of the aisle they're on, they have a right to inquire about and know about? But this wasn't the only thing. Okay. So not just the restraining order while she's pregnant, but the violations of the restraining order when she's pregnant again and against the child that she's given birth to. There was also a domestic violence incident. Okay. So let me get there. So I want to throw some dates at you. Mm-mm. Some of the questions, by the way, that she was asked, so these are the exact wording. Have you or any member of your family or close friends ever been the victim or witness to any crime? She checked no. Have you ever been involved in a lawsuit other than a divorce proceeding? She checked no. There are some arguments too, by the way, later on that she was really in like this whole thing for child support, which kind of met her ad hoc definition that she gave in defense of herself anyway, of the fact that she considered a lawsuit only to be, taking someone to court for money, is kind of the layperson's explanation that she gave. And she just shot herself in the foot with that for sure. Hold on. Is there any questions in chat, Crafton, or anything? No. just want to talk about her declarations to you guys. That was in December, the end of 2020. And she when she came to testify in these 2022 hearings, she also was granted immunity. She pled the fifth. So she did not, any testimony we're talking about came after she was granted immunity. It's the only way she would testify. She had her lawyer there. And so all of this, by the way, kind of comes about after quite the process where she had issued, a statement at the end of 2020 that had some questionable things and new information came out from there. And she did walk some of that back. Some of it she, admitted to. But in the end, it required immunity to get her there. My bookmark did not stick. Hold on. So let's see. So the two incidences, by the way, of the violations, July 21st, 2001 and June 29th of 2002. So keep in mind too, the I forgot part. She at least knew that this was going on enough to report a violation in July of 2001. And then again, a year later in June, late June of 2002. So it spans a little. It's nuts. Okay. So in the middle of all that, there is a DV incident with Eddie, and that was on November 2nd of 2001. So she said in the end, she was with him for about 6 years. Okay. And it was complicated. It sounds like it, by the way, because apparently Marcella was like there in the background the whole time. So she had a two-timer, right? I also think that kind of relates to this. Anybody who at all knows anything about the Scott Peterson case knows that there was an Amber Fry and that she factored heavily into the opinions and thoughts, both in the public and with the jurors. Again, having written a book, we're kind of privy to some of the thought processes that happened in the deliberation room that we wouldn't have been otherwise. And just about everybody that participated in that book indicated that their thoughts and feelings kind of changed when Amber showed up, because that's when they decided he's a big old liar. And it's when they decided that they had now a motive. Okay. So having somebody here who has withheld all this information about this very tumultuous relationship, or essentially she was cheated on the whole time. There's just no getting around it. And where she took actions that now, fast forward to 2022, she's playing Bible. She's just doing things out of spite. Well, that fits in very nicely with November 2nd in 2001. It is actually Eddie who called the police. And the way she tells it is that they were fighting. She handed her child to her mother, her newborn, went into the room and quote unquote ran off on him, or took off on him. Okay, here's the actual testimony. Cliff Gardner says, "You say took off?" And she's like, "I'm sorry, I punched him." And Cliff asks, "Well, how many times?" And she's like, "I don't recall." "Was it more than one?" She's like, "Probably." And he's like, "Okay, so did he punch you back?" "Never touched me," she said. Okay. So this is all now in the confines of she has been caught saying, "I've never been the victim of a crime. I've never even witnessed a crime. Now this whole thing never happened." And then they delve deeper into me. And he asked, did he have any injuries? And she's like, "Well, I don't really know." And he's like, "Well, did you?" She had like a bloody lip that she claims now was like, she says from yelling, she caught it maybe on her braces. Something happened. She was bleeding from her lip. Well, he called the police because she was hauling off on him. Police showed up. Somehow, Eddie's the one who gets arrested, hauled off, sat in jail. Another restraining order where she is the victim is entered. So now we have a whole second restraining order. This one directly for domestic violence, okay? Keep in mind that she had almost no time between her pregnancies, okay? It was like one, then the next. And so she's pregnant again. And this is an actual assault that he is being arrested for, okay? He's taken to jail. A restraining order is issued. Now she would not comply. She wouldn't do anything to assist. But nevertheless, he sat in jail. And in the end, he pled guilty. Okay. The restraining order stayed in place for a year. So she had to explain that, she didn't think of that because she didn't think of herself as a victim. In fact, she considered herself the aggressor. Well, this led to the next series of like, the fuck? Because of course the appellate attorneys then ask her, but you said you never witnessed a crime. You guys, I couldn't even, okay? This is just what's being put into the decision itself when they are rehashing the procedural, evidence as they feel it's relevant to what the judge is about to say. Listen to this shit. During her testimony, juror number 7 agreed that hitting Mr. Whiteside wasn't a crime, but she denied being a witness to a crime because, quote, she didn't see herself do it, unquote. I don't stand outside my body to watch myself do things, but yeah, I punched him. I did, she said.
And that flew.
Yeah. Yeah, it did. It did. And you guys, this is getting like, we're getting close now to where I was like, yeah, I'm gonna have to do this in 2 parts because I'm getting to like, what? No, the reactions are coming out of my voice. I'm just trying to do like an audio read through so that people can hear this whole opinion without having to read it themselves and kind of come and go and visit it and, timestamp and come back when they have time or whatever, do it while they're cleaning. So I don't want too much of my opinion to come through, although I am going to say right now, I think it really did, especially when I started getting into this stuff, because it was just bizarre. So she's like, yeah, no, I still checked. No, because it's not like I saw myself do it. I didn't witness a crime because I didn't see myself do it. Now, keep in mind, too, in her basis for the Marcella restraining order, she's listing things like Eddie getting maced in the face. She's saying Marcella is stalking her. She called it stalker-ish, okay? But she's saying that she's looking in her rearview mirror and she sees Marcella following her around in the car. That Marcella kicked in their front door. And they're like, okay, so you don't consider that a crime? She's saying, well, yeah, I guess I do. But I didn't see her mace Eddie in the face. I mean, I didn't actually see her kick in the door. I mean, I saw the door kicked in, but I didn't actually see when she was kicking it, So it's just bleh, okay? But this one was even more so because then they present her with, well, you do realize that he pled guilty? And her response to that is like, well, I don't know. He didn't really talk to me about those things, but I wasn't, and I'm still not a victim. So it just didn't cross my mind. It didn't cross my mind. That's the most repeated thing that she said sitting on that stand. Again, keeping in mind that she had to be given immunity to even get up there because she'd already issued a formal affidavit on this in late 2020 that asserted all these other things. I mean, this is really about the fact that she committed perjury and now she needs to cover her ass, okay? Sadly, this is a high-profile case. Because any other case, I don't know, it just doesn't get more wrapped with a bow. You know what I mean? This is a juror who has committed misconduct. There's just no getting around it. Prejudicial misconduct. one of the witnesses that was stipulated to, there were a couple shenanigans with witnesses. So she, of course, was one of the maid. There was 5 days of testimony. She was 2 days of that. Okay. They were going to get Justin Faulkner, who was very high profile, dismissed juror, who came out, and a lot of people will remember him because he started to speak to the media right away and was saying, like, the state's losing it in there. He's innocent. Okay. So of course that made like major waves, and every 24-hour news station around wanted to get Justin Faulkner to talk. And so that's kind of where his name became more known, because he was one of the first jurors that were dismissed, and he was active in talking to the press. Well, he had some huge statements to make about her, and his testimony had a lot of weight, in my opinion. But in the end, he was not allowed to testify. Here's why. So he works for the United States military. Okay. He's in Iraq at the time of this hearing, training military dogs. Okay. So the petitioner asks, can we have him testify like via Zoom, for instance? Because he works for our United States military. He is on assignment. He cannot be released to come here to testify. They had a whole legal proceeding over this in late December of 2021, where essentially the judge says no, that they'll give extra time for them to make arrangements for Justin Faulkner to be transported back to San Mateo County to testify, but he's not going to be allowed to testify from Iraq using Zoom, because that's like preferential treatment. And the court needs the ability to, to scan him in the same way they have every other witness, to test their veracity through visual means, all this other stuff. Okay. But here's what he stipulated that he was going to testify to. It did not end up being a stipulation in the court because, of course, the state is like, nah, we need to question him about this. But it made it into this ruling exactly what he was going to testify to. Number one, he's going to say Rochelle Neese talked about Connor a lot and referred to him as little man throughout the duration of the trial. That, you guys, itself is a whole nother sector of misconduct. Most of us know, even if we're just kind of avid true crime fans, you can't discuss a case while the proceedings are still going on. Jurors are not allowed to deliberate or otherwise confer with one another while testimony and the trial is still going on. They have to wait for deliberations. That is his first thing. Second thing is that Rochelle said she was having money problems as the result of her job not paying for her to be there. And this, of course, was an issue, and it gets explored more in part 2, where they go over all of her disclosures and the inconsistencies that were found in her child support cases, because this was extremely burdensome for her. Extremely. And it played in more because she told the court that she lived with her mother and with Eddie. And so the two of them together can support her kids, and this isn't going to be a hardship. She had to say that in order for the judge to allow her to stay. And yet in her child support documents, it went a different way. Okay. So that's why statement number 2 was important. He was also going to testify that she told him that she could have been excused for a financial hardship, but she stayed because she wanted to be on the jury. Important for the reason I said it before. And number 4, she made all kinds of talk with him about a book deal. Justin Faulkner was dismissed midway through the trial. And again, this is a jury that was not sequestered. Next time I will pull up a picture of the billboard that had been erected right outside the courthouse by a local radio station with a big old picture of Scott Peterson and a phone number to call that says, innocent or monster. And it's, if anybody remembers the O.J. Simpson case, and they remember, was it Time magazine? One of them, maybe People, one of the magazines, everybody ended up coming out with the same mugshot, but one of the news organizations had darkened it, if everybody remembers that. Okay. It's a little like that. Newsweek? Okay, I knew it was like one of them. So think of it like that. They've taken the most like ominous looking picture they can of him. You know, it's like this the non-sequestering was an issue, but in the end, it was an issue that the court did not consider to be one to move forward. I mean, it all came down to this issue with Rochelle Neese, okay? But keeping in mind that Justin Faulkner's not dismissed until a couple months into trial, with a few months still left to go, she's just an alternate at that point. And there's already talk of a book deal. It's a problem. Okay. So he had a lot to offer. And in the end, they denied his ability to come and testify. So again, we can't, I mean, that's what's unfortunate. We can't necessarily take his, you know, and the judge, of course, did not take into consideration any of those elements at all, because they hadn't been tested in the courtroom. There was no opportunity to question him by both sides. And so there's just a note that these are the things that he is going to testify to, but he never got that chance. He was denied that chance because the United States military wasn't going to give him time off to go testify in Scott Peterson's appeal. So it never happened, okay? And that's kind of where this one leaves off, you guys. Question becomes ultimately an issue of not juror committed misconduct. The judge goes on to say, yes, she did. But it becomes a breakdown of why it wasn't prejudicial. I look forward to talking about. I'll probably open the panel up next week too, to allow other people to come up and kind of express their thoughts. Because in the end, this isn't really even to me about the case itself, right? It's about the legal system, completely about the legal system. Because if this was any one of us, if this was one of our family members, if this was one of our children, okay, we would want better. I mean, when we hear that we have the benefit of 12 jurors, unbiased jurors, it's just inherent, like constitutionally, we make the assumption that they're being honest in the voir dire process. It's what it's all for. And that's why I actually find this completely disturbing. Like all other affiliation, prior involvement with this case aside for me, it's what makes me very frustrated with this most recent ruling. Now, there's other things in store for the Scott Peterson appeal. It's not over. This sector is, you know, this habeas is closed. There is no going back and saying, hey, reconsider. It all has to be new stuff. It's like back to the drawing board. But I think that it's important for it to be talked about, because the truth is that Scott Peterson is not a real likable guy. Most people do think he's guilty. And my hope is that we can have conversations where it's like, you know, it doesn't matter if he's guilty, right? This isn't really about his guilt or innocence, but it is about the ability of our court system here in the United States to pretty much do what is politically best for the appointees and elected officials, what is more ingratiated with public opinion rather than what the letter of the law prescribes. You know, at some point I'll move on to other cases too. And one that comes to mind is Brendan Dassey, where we've seen this same sort of thing where, and unfortunately the rulings, they can't lie. Okay. They can't be that, overt, but there is a ton of leniency that's given to the judiciary to be able to insert their judge that person might have. And they don't even have to give a reasoned argument, in my opinion, because I think this case is going to show she could not get around. And admitting to just about all the facts of the case that were put before her for an appeal process, which, by the way, was just about getting a new trial. It was just about getting a new trial where they did not have a Rochelle Neese sitting on that jury. And, you know, it's not the end of the road, but it's a blemish, in my opinion, on our legal system that is now sitting there. And it's just not the most popular thing to talk about, which is why I'm more than happy to talk about it. So I appreciate everyone being here. It won't be very long. I think my download has completed. So I'm going to have, I just kind of did a summarization with my own opinions thrown in there because it killed me, you guys, to read this, trying to just give you an audio of the actual shit and not be able to bust in with my opinion every 2 seconds. So this was all my opinion. That's a companion to just, if you want to hear the actual ruling itself, it's going to be just the first half, which is all we talked about here today. The second half will be out within the next couple days, so that there's time for everybody to listen. And then next week we'll talk more about it and go from there. Yeah, okay, so Rose, hold on, let me get into StreamYard. There is, and we'll talk more about that one next week too. So everything is, is a wrap on this particular, the Rochelle Nice issue, the habeas as it stood for this whole time period, okay, is done. And now it's about elevating it in the appeals process through the HRC and Cliff Gardner. They are also having to start from scratch. There's two separate things going on, and we'll talk about that because it's not over. This issue on its face is closed, okay? But there's a ton of other things that have happened since the initial filing, and they have 120 days to go to court on those and start that process. They are doing that. They have left him. They have not sent him back to San Quentin. In the middle of all this, too, it's worth noting that there were judicial errors found, okay? This was not a completely unsuccessful appeal. Judicial errors were found around voir dire process and jury exclusion based on people's thoughts about the death penalty. So, death penalty, they were excused because they needed a death qualified jury. Okay, so that's true, right? But you have to add, the Constitution makes them ask a follow-up question, which is, if this person's found guilty, can you set aside your personal beliefs in order to enact the death penalty, even if you don't believe in it personally, right? Didn't happen, right? So that's how, in the end, what he did get out of this is the death penalty thrown out. It's not a huge win because he's in California where they haven't executed anybody in forever, So the odds that he was ever going to be put to death are pretty low anyway. But he is off death row. And right now he's being held in a separate jail, and he's staying there while this continues. But again, it's going to be a whole new set of things. If anyone had, I'll just leave it up here for a second. If anyone has any questions or anything they want to start. Yes, I hear to that, Tiffany. And that's the kind of stuff I do want to talk about on these kind of Saturday afternoon things. There's a lot of flaws, and they go up and down. So I'm, of course, starting with something that's higher profile. I really did want to talk about it more than I ended up talking about it. But family court is there too, but it goes high and low, All right, everybody. Well, keep an eye out. I'm looking, and it looks like my recording downloaded, so I just got to upload it now into the thing. So part 1 of just the audio transcript of the ruling will be up here momentarily, and I will see you next Saturday. And until then, I'm sure I'll see everyone around the tubes and on chats and all that other stuff. In the description, information on our Patreon. I am there with my husband Crafton more often than the once a week. I do go live kind of sporadically in between Saturdays. That's just to chit chat and say hi to members of the community and kind of hang out. So if you're into that too, hit the bell, and I will see you all soon.